During his residence in London, Newton had made the acquaintance of John Locke. Locke had taken a very great interest in the new theories of the Principia. He was one of a number of Newton's friends who began to be uneasy and dissatisfied at seeing the most eminent scientific man of his age left to depend upon the meagre remuneration of a college fellowship and a professorship. 1693. During the period 1692 to 1693, Newton is known to have suffered a breakdown of nervous functioning, or a supposed depression lasting for 18 months. As reported by Huygens, he suffered insomnia and poor digestion, in his letters to friends showing signs of irrationality. During exhumation, the hair from Newton's dead body was found to contain high levels of mercury. Remains of desiccated hair were later found to contain 4 times the lead, arsenic and antimony, and 15 times mercury than in normal range samples. 2 hairs contained mercury and separately lead at levels indicating chronic poisoning. Symptoms of mercury poisoning exhibited by Newton were apparently tremor, severe insomnia, delusions of persecution or paranoid ideas, problems with memory, mental confusion, and withdrawal or decline from personal friendships, significant in the period of time. The deterioration of his relations with his protégé Nicolas Fléchet de Douillier. Newton documented the first performed alchemy experiment during 1678, having first obtained furnaces and chemicals in 1669. Experiments with metal included analysis of taste, of which there are 108 documented, including mercury. Strong, sourish, ungrateful, documented also by the scientist, were similar experiments with arsenic, gold and lead. Newton recorded in his notebook of experimenting with chemicals during June 1693. The limited evidence for symptomatic mental illness of Newton during this period stemmed from correspondences revealing melancholia, desire for withdrawal from relations including his good friends, insomnia, apathy, loss of appetite, delusion of persecution, possibly failures in memory, and bipolar. In a letter written to Samuel Pepys, Newton stated he was extremely troubled by the embroilment I am in, have neither ate nor slept well in the last 12 months, nor have my former consistency of mind. The 13th of September 1693, on the 30th of that month, Newton reported he had been seized by a distemper that kept him awake for above 5 nights altogether, running the Royal Mint. For the last half of Newton's adult life, 30 years, he was Warden of the Royal Mint as well as Master of the Mint. Appointment to the Mint. Newton got his appointment because of his renown as a scientist and because he supported the winning side in the Glorious Revolution. At some time Locke nearly succeeded in procuring Newton an appointment as Provost of King's College, Cambridge, but the college had offered a successful resistance on the grounds that the appointment would be illegal. Its statutes required that the provost should be in priest's orders. Charles Montague, afterwards Earl of Halifax, was a Fellow of Trinity and an intimate friend of Newton, and it was on his influence that Newton relied for promotion to some honourable and lucrative post. However, his hopes were spoiled by long delay. In one of his letters to Locke at the beginning of 1692, when Montague, Lord Monmouth and Locke were exerting themselves to obtain some appointment for Newton, Newton wrote that he was fully convinced that Montague, upon an old grudge which he thought had been worn out, was false to him. Newton was now 55 years old, and whilst those of his own standing at the university had been appointed to high posts in church or state, he still remained without any mark of national gratitude. Montague, after being appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1694, finally put this right. He had previously consulted Newton upon the subject of the recoinage, and took the opportunity to appoint Newton to the post of Warden of the Royal Mint in 1696. In a letter to Newton announcing the news, Montague writes, "I am very glad that at last I can give you a good proof of my friendship, and the esteem the King has of your merits. Mr. Overton, the Warden of the Mint, is made one of the Commissioners of Customs, and the King has promised me to make Mr. Newton Warden of the Mint. The office is the most proper for you. 'Tis the chief office in the Mint. 'Tis worth £500 or £600 per annum, and has not too much business to require more attendance than you can spare. The letter must have convinced Newton of the sincerity of Montague's good intentions towards him. We find them living as friends on the most intimate terms until Halifax's death in 1715. Achievements and influence. Although the post was intended to be a sinecure, Newton took it seriously. By the time of his appointment, the currency had been seriously weakened by an increase in clipping and counterfeiting during the 9 Years' War to the extent that it had been decided to recall and replace all hammered silver coinage in circulation. The exercise came close to disaster due to fraud and mismanagement, but was salvaged by Newton's personal intervention. Newton's chemical and mathematical knowledge proved of great use in carrying out this great recoinage of 1696, a process that was completed in about 2 years. Newton was subsequently given the post of Master of the Mint in 1699, a post worth between £1,200 and £1,500 per annum. Despite counterfeiting being considered high treason, punishable by hanging, drawing and quartering, convicting even the most flagrant criminals could be extremely difficult. Undaunted, Newton conducted more than 100 cross-examinations of witnesses, informers, and suspects between June 1698 and Christmas 1699. He himself gathered much of the evidence he needed to successfully prosecute 28 coiners. One of Newton's cases as the King's attorney was against William Challoner. Challoner's schemes included setting up phony conspiracies of Catholics and then turning in the hapless conspirators whom he had entrapped. Challoner made himself rich enough to posture as a gentleman. Petitioning Parliament, Challoner accused the Mint of providing tools to counterfeiters. He proposed that he be allowed to inspect the Mint's processes in order to improve them. He petitioned Parliament to adopt his plans for a coinage that could not be counterfeited, while at the same time striking false coins. Newton put Challoner on trial for counterfeiting and had him sent to Newgate Prison in September 1697. But Challoner had friends in high places, who helped him secure an acquittal and his release. Newton put him on trial a second time with conclusive evidence. Challoner was convicted of high treason and hanged, drawn and quartered on the 23rd of March 1699 at Tyburn Gallows. Following the 1707 union between the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland, Newton used his experience from the English recoinage to direct the 1707 to 1710 Scottish recoinage, resulting in a common currency for the new Kingdom of Great Britain. Newton also drew up a very extensive table of assays of foreign coins, as a result of a report written by Newton on the 21st of September 1717 to the Lords Commissioners of His Majesty's Treasury. The bimetallic relationship between gold coins and silver coins was changed by royal proclamation on the 22nd of December 1717, forbidding the exchange of gold guineas for more than 21 silver shillings. Due to differing valuations in other European countries, this inadvertently resulted in a silver shortage, as silver coins were used to pay for imports, while exports were paid for in gold, effectively moving Britain from the silver standard to its first gold standard, rather than the bimetallic standard implied by the proclamation. Due to his income from the mint, Newton became very wealthy, although he lost a substantial sum in the collapse of the South Sea Bubble. Newton's niece Catherine Conduit reported that he lost £20,000. Of this, however, he never much liked to hear. This was a fortune at the time, but it is not clear whether it was a monetary loss or an opportunity cost loss. Newton continued in his position at the Royal Mint until his death in 1727. Fluxions. Up to the time of the publication of the Principia in 1687, the method of fluxions, which had been invented by Newton, and had been of great assistance to him in his mathematical investigations, was still, except to Newton and his friends, a secret. One of the most important rules of the method forms the second lemma of the second book of the Principia. Though this new and powerful method was of great help to Newton in his work, he did not exhibit it in the results. He was aware that the well-known geometrical methods of the ancients would make his new creations seem less strange and uncouth to those not familiar with the new method. The Principia gives no information on the subject of the notation adopted in the new calculus, and it was not until 1693 that it was communicated to the scientific world in the second volume of John Wallis's works. Newton's admirers in the Netherlands informed Wallis that Newton's method of fluxions passed there under the name of Gottfried Leibniz's calculus differentials. It was therefore thought necessary that an early opportunity should be taken of asserting Newton's claim to be the inventor of the method of fluxions, and this was why this method first appeared in Wallis's works. A further account was given in the first edition of Newton's Optics. To this work were added two treatises, entitled Accident Tractatus Duo Adjustum Authorized a Speciebus and Magnitudem Figuram Curvilinearum, the one bearing the title Introductio ad Quadratura Curvarum, and the other Enumeratio Linearum Tertii Ordinis. The first contains an explanation of the doctrine of fluxions, and of its application to the quadrature of curves. The second, a classification of 72 curves of the third order, with an account of their properties. The reason for publishing these two tracts in his Optics, from the subsequent editions of which they were omitted, is thus stated in the advertisement. In a letter written to Leibniz in the year 1679, and published by Dr. Wallis, I mentioned a method by which I had found some general theorems about squaring curvilinear figures on comparing them with the conic sections, or other the simplest figures with which they might be compared, and some years ago I lent out a manuscript containing such theorems, and having since met with some things copied out of it, I have on this occasion made it public, prefixing to it an introduction, and joining a scholium concerning that method. And I have joined with it another small tract concerning the curvilinear figures of the second kind, which was also written many years ago, and made known to some friends, who have solicited the making it public. In 1707 William Whiston published the Algebra Lectures which Newton had delivered at Cambridge, under the title of Arithmetica Universalis, sive de compositione resolutionis arithmetica liber. We are not accurately informed how Whiston obtained possession of this work, but it is stated by one of the editors of the English edition, that Mr. Whiston, thinking it a pity that so noble and useful a work should be doomed to a college confinement, obtained leave to make it public. It was soon afterwards translated into English by Raphson, and a second edition of it, with improvements by the author, was published at London in 1712 by Dr. Machen, Secretary to the Royal Society, with the view of stimulating mathematicians to write annotations on this admirable work. S. Gravesander published a tract entitled Specimen Commentarii in Arithmeticam Universalum, and Maclaurin's algebra seems to have been drawn up in consequence of this appeal. Bernoulli's mathematical challenge. Newton's solution of the celebrated problems proposed by Johann Bernoulli and Leibniz deserves mention among his mathematical works. In June 1696 Bernoulli addressed a letter to the mathematicians of Europe challenging them to solve two problems, to determine the brachistochrone between two given points not in the same vertical line, to determine a curve such that, if a straight line drawn through a fixed point A meet it in 2 points P1, P2, then map 1 plus map 2 will be constant. This challenge was first made in the Ada Lipsiensia for June 1696. 6 months were allowed by Bernoulli for the solution of the problem, and in the event of none being sent to him he promised to publish his own. The 6 months elapsed without any solution being produced, but he received a letter from Leibniz, stating that he had cut the knot of the most beautiful of these problems, and requesting that the period for their solution should be extended to Christmas next, that the French and Italian mathematicians might have no reason to complain of the shortness of the period. Bernoulli adopted the suggestion, and publicly announced the postponement for the information of those who might not see the Ada Lipsiensia. On 29 January 1697, Newton returned at 4 p.m. from working at the Royal Mint and found in his post the problems that Bernoulli had sent to him directly. 2 copies of the printed paper containing the problems. Newton stayed up to 4 a.m. before arriving at the solutions. On the following day he sent a solution of them to Montague, then president of the Royal Society, for anonymous publication. He announced that the curve required in the first problem must be acycloid, and he gave a method of determining it. He also solved the second problem, and in so doing showed that by the same method other curves might be found which cut off 3 or more segments having similar properties. Solutions were also obtained from Leibniz and the Marquis de l'Hôpital, and, although Newton's solution was anonymous, he was recognized by Bernoulli as its author, tanquam ex unge leonim. In 1699, Newton's position as a mathematician and natural philosopher was recognized by the French Academy of Sciences. In that year the Academy was remodeled, and 8 foreign associates were created. Leibniz, Domenico Guglielmini, Hartz-Circa, and E. W. Tschirnhaus were appointed on 4 February, James Bernoulli and John Bernoulli on 14 February, and Newton and Ole Roma on 21 February. End of professorship and presidency of the Royal Society. While Newton held the office of Warden of the Mint, he retained his chair of mathematics at Cambridge, and discharged the duties of the post. But shortly after he was promoted to be Master of the Mint, he appointed Whiston his deputy with the full profits of the place. Whiston began his astronomical lectures as Newton's deputy in January 1701. On 10 December 1701, Newton resigned his professorship, thereby at the same time resigning his fellowship at Trinity, which he had held with the Louasian professorship since 1675 by virtue of the royal mandate. Whiston's claims to succeed Newton in the Louasian chair were successfully supported by Newton himself. On the 11th of November 1701, Newton was again elected one of the representatives of the university in Parliament, but he retained his seat only until the dissolution in the following July. Newton does not seem to have been a candidate at this election, but at the next dissolution in 1705 he stood for the university. He was warmly supported by the residents, but being a Whig, he was opposed by the non-residents, and beaten by a large majority. In the autumn of 1703, Lord Somers retired from the presidency of the Royal Society, and on 30 November 1703 Newton was elected to succeed him. Newton was annually re-elected to this honourable post for the remainder of his life. He held the office for 25 years, the longest term of office for any Royal Society president since except Sir Joseph Banks. As president, Newton was brought into close association with Prince George of Denmark, the Queen's husband, who had been elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. The prince had offered, on Newton's recommendation, to cover the expense of printing Flamsteed's observations, especially his catalogue of the stars. It was natural that the Queen should form a high opinion of one whose merits had made such a deep impression on her husband. In April 1705, when the Queen, the Prince and the Court were staying at the royal residence at Newmarket, they paid a visit to Cambridge, where they were guests of Richard Bentley, Master of Trinity College. Her Majesty went in state to the Regent House, where a congregation of the Spenati was held, and a number of honorary degrees conferred. Afterwards the Queen held a court at Trinity Lodge, where she conferred the Order of Knighthood upon Sir Isaac Newton.